I'm Tim Constantine, and from New York City, this is the Capitol Hill Show. The war in Gaza. If you want to evoke a passionate response, simply bring the topic up to virtually anyone. If you're a supporter of the Palestinians, you are probably quite confident that they're in the right. If you're from Israel or some of the Western supporting nations, you may see things very differently. In the United States, it's a presidential election year, and so politics is rearing its ugly head and sticking its nose into the entire situation. Has the Biden-Harris team done enough to encourage a ceasefire? Would a President Trump have any more support in his effort? Lost in all of this is the human element. There are women, children, lives torn apart, families destroyed, and all of it at what price? For what reason? We can talk about the politics of Gaza, but we must talk about the real, live human beings being impacted every single day.
In the 2024 U.S. presidential campaign, both major candidates have staked out a position on the war in Gaza.
Now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done.
Harris, you can't lie!
Many supporters of the Palestinians, however, question Harris's motives and her authenticity. She's been in office for the entire duration of the war. Why is it just now the time for a ceasefire? 15,000 protesters turned out at the Democratic Convention in Chicago this past August, most of whom were upset with the vice president. There's a lot of frustration with Vice President Harris. Explain to me why.
It's not only Harris, it's the Democratic machine. The frustration is with the Democratic machine, with Biden and with Harris. Changing the name is not going to change anything. We need real change. We need to stop funding the genocide.
But if the protesters don't support Harris, would they be better off with President Trump?
I speak to you today as a lifelong supporter and true friend of Israel. I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state.
That footage is actually from his first campaign 8 years ago. Trump's support for Israel has been unwavering. Lost in all of this political jockeying is the human element. 1 year into the war in Gaza, and the human cost is staggering. More than 40,000 have been reported dead. Schools are closed. Families have been displaced from their homes. Food shortages are commonplace, and even hospitals are out of service. There's nothing that is remotely close to normal. While healthcare is increasingly difficult to find, the tragic truth is that in a war zone, it is more needed than ever. Dr. Adam Hamawy was a trauma surgeon for the United States Army in Iraq. He has also taken his medical expertise to war-torn countries like Bosnia and Syria. This year, he volunteered his surgical skills for the people of Gaza. This brilliant surgeon could stay in the United States with a private plastic surgery practice, but instead, he feels compelled to help the people in Gaza, particularly the children whose lives and bodies have been ravaged by war. Tell me the origins. Why become a doctor in the first place?
Like probably every other doctor, it's to help people. I mean, it's getting your hands and trying to be a healer and make people better.
You served in the U.S. Army, you served in Iraq, in the war theater there. You saw things that probably no one should ever see. Tell me a little bit about that experience And particularly, was there a moment where you realized that first, oh my goodness, the level at which war can excel?
Yeah, and no matter how hard you train, the best medical centers in the country, it's not going to give you the experience that a war does. You see more in a week than you see in a year here in the United States in the worst inner city. And so I went to Iraq, like really within a year of me finishing my training as a surgeon. And it's overwhelming, but your skills are put to use. All this bureaucracy that we don't like about medicine, the things that we don't like about medicine is left behind, and you're just left with exactly why you went into it. You're just helping people without all the BS that's involved.
And I don't mean to trivialize by referencing television, but I remember as a kid watching MASH, and you would have comedy, you would have good-natured humor between the personnel, but every once in a while they would remind you that it was a war setting, and you would have something horrific. Is there something that stands out in your mind as the first thing where you had that realization that this is awful?
I was in Iraq probably less than a week. We had some downtime. There wasn't anything going on, so we said we were going to go to the PX, just to buy something. A group of us surgeons were just about to head over there, and we got delayed. And then we heard that the PX got struck. So we kind of just missed being there. But now we started receiving the casualties, and it was mass casualties. We had 17 come in that day. And we were operating basically all day and all night. And those, it was like MASH. It's a combat support hospital. It's basically tents. We were operating in trailers, and each trailer had 2 surgeries going on at the same time in close quarters. There, again, it's no joke, and you know where you're at, and it sets you straight.
And then Syria.
So Syria, yeah, this has been ongoing for the last decade. So I've gone multiple times with different organizations, really along the Syrian border. So Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and usually for a week at a time, helping mostly refugees and whatever comes in.
And then tell me about the Palestinian American Medical Association.
So in October, everyone knows what's happened, and November, it looked like this was going to be something that's going to extend to a long time. So I started looking right away, how could I go? And I reached out to every organization that I knew saying, are you sending teams in, and do you have room for me? I really got no responses for about 3 or 4 months. Even in January, I heard, organizations were beginning to get teams, but they didn't have enough slots for all the physicians that wanted to go. In March, one of them, the Palestinian American Medical Association, they basically reached out to me and said, we heard you're looking to go, and we have a slot for you. So I said, I'm on board.
A big deal was made, and rightfully so, after 9/11. You have all the video of people fleeing the area when the buildings were collapsing, except police and firefighters, first responders heading in and heading toward trouble. You're doing that on a whole different level. This isn't just an incident. This is places being torn apart, literally, and you are choosing to go there. What motivates you?
So we all are presented with opportunities to make a difference. And these choices often are perceived as being dangerous, like 9/11, like wars. But, I and other doctors and nurses have been blessed with skills that really are this is the setting to use them. If you're not going to use them in war, where it really matters and where you can really make a difference, where they need healers, where else are you going to do it? And danger is everywhere. We could all get killed in a car accident on the way home. And so you have to kind of, at some point, trust in your, trust in God and go.
Let's talk specifically about Gaza. When you arrived there, what did you find?
It's like another world. unlike anywhere else I had been. So immediately upon crossing the border, I crossed the border at Rafah before that was taken. And, you see destruction in the distance, okay? You hear the drones immediately. The constant buzzing above your head was 24/7. You're being watched. You hear explosions. That's not unusual for a war setting, so I'd heard that before. But they tended to be more constant and closer than they're usually. I mean, when I was in Iraq, we got mortared all the time. But this is, again, much bigger. Like even things that were miles away, you could feel the impact through your clothes, through your body, that the force that was being used was nothing like I'd experienced before.
And what were the facilities available to you when you got there, medical facilities?
So I was located at the Gaza European Hospital, which was about 15 minutes away from the border, 20 minutes away. It was a large hospital, I think the largest operating at the time that I was there. It had operating rooms, but nothing in them really, other than anesthesia machines and some beds. There was minimal supplies except what we brought with us, and some leftover supplies that had been not used. And what is that? It's like usually the things that are for like elective surgeries that no one was doing. Like you had a lot of laparoscopic equipment for like gallbladders, but every once in a while you're getting a gallbladder, but they're getting trauma 24/7. So the supplies they had were not the supplies they needed. There wasn't even soap. There wasn't personnel there. We were a big relief when we arrived.
Procedurally, how would it work when there were casualties from whatever the circumstance around you? How were they staged? How did they make their way to and into the hospital?
So there were ambulances that were out there, so medical teams and rescue teams, but more commonly just families and people just bringing them over in whatever way, whether carried on their shoulders or on carts being driven by donkeys or whatever cars that were available. Often it was sometimes hours after the strike, because they would have to get recovered from inside buildings and then brought to the hospital.
And what was the typical day there? You told me about in Iraq, you told me about in Syria, but what was your typical day when you were serving in Gaza and trying to help people there?
It was similar. We had an elective schedule that was much more robust than what I had in Iraq. So in Iraq, you usually ended up evacuating our soldiers, so they didn't stay around a lot to need a lot of elective surgeries by us. But the hospital was just filled with injured and wounded people that needed multiple surgeries to clean them out, debride them, and just kind of, keep it in the process. So we had that schedule, and then within that schedule, we saw the trauma that came in. So, like I said, usually the bombings were 24/7, but they were more extreme at night. They usually peaked around 5 o'clock in the morning, and then we'd start seeing them around 8 or 9 o'clock.
And there probably is no standard, but what was a standard trauma victim? What would you see?
Mostly children. So over half my cases were children. They were blast injuries primarily. So blast injuries is a combination of burns and multiple fragment, shrapnel injuries. And they range from anything about the size of a, speck of dust, that peppered the body, to, sometimes things that are as large as your arm that would go through people. And then after that, you'd have your gunshot wounds and individual injuries like that. A lot of crush injuries from the buildings. Often there were amputations, traumatic, or limbs that were so mangled that we had to complete the amputation ourselves.
How did your work in Gaza compare to your work elsewhere? Was it comparable? Was it easier? Was it more challenging?
It was more challenging for multiple reasons. First is that we were really dealing mostly with children. I mean, this is the hardest thing. I mean, even here, when I get called to an emergency room and it's a child, it's just tough. And that's what we're mostly dealing with. And now add that is that I'm not dealing with a little cut, because they were playing soccer or something. These are war injuries I'm looking at, things that were not meant for children. And the volume was just unprecedented from my experience. This was nonstop for the entire time that I was there.
You've been in multiple locations in horrific circumstances. When you're home, when you're in Princeton at your practice, or when you're at your home at night, do you see some of those people? Does that stay with you, the human side, the human element?
That stays with you forever. I mean, I still dream of things about 20 years ago from when I was in Iraq. And this is just, obviously it's fresher, and still in contact with a lot of the people that were there that we worked with. Some of the doctors, medical students, and nurses that I worked with just a few months ago have been killed. So yeah, they're constantly, there's not like an hour that goes by without getting, a thought reminded, a text from something to kind of trigger those images again.
Would you go back?
Yes.
Why?
I have to, if I can make a difference, that's what we have to do. We all have to do what we can. And if I can go back, then I have to. It would be a special opportunity because not everyone can. Few people are allowed in, and few people can make a difference. And so I think everyone has to do what they can. If you're a doctor, you should go help, or a nurse. If if you're a politician, you need to change something. If you're a reporter, you need to report on what's going on. I mean, everyone has a role to play into this. And as a surgeon, our role is to do what we can there, and if not, receive them here. But we have to, we're going to be responsible for what we did and what we didn't do.
You wrote a letter to the president, and it was kind of a unique story on how that got delivered. But tell me, what was the purpose of the letter? Why did you feel the need to reach out and tell President Biden your story?
Because I don't think anyone was paying attention. I think, the danger in Gaza, what we see is not really what's happening. I mean, it's much, much worse, and what we see is bad. Our presence just by itself, everyone says, like, is it safe there? Nowhere is safe. And the hospital itself, we were getting strikes that were right there. I mean, the whole hospital would shake, people would get knocked down. There was homes that were right outside the hospital that got destroyed, and doctors and nurses were killed. And this was constant. And I wanted to make sure that, it was clear so that no one says we didn't know what was happening. And so that's why I wrote that letter, and hoping that, someone would try to do something, and not just for us, but about the whole situation.
What kind of a response did you get from the president?
Nothing direct. I didn't hear anything back. I mean, he made some statements how, he's going to, try to get a ceasefire, etc., but no direct response.
In your opinion, having been there, should the United States and can the United States play a greater role in getting a ceasefire?
Absolutely. The United States is already playing a great role, okay? I mean, it's providing the means for this to happen. We're providing the arms. We're providing the weapons. We're providing the political support for this. So because of that large role we're playing, we could just as easily not provide those weapons and not provide that political support for basically the genocide that's happening there.
Dr. Hamawy is not alone in this sentiment. Roger Waters was a founding member of rock music legends Pink Floyd. The band has sold more than 250 million records worldwide, and some 50 years after its release, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon still appears regularly on current music charts, documenting the top albums of any given week. Waters has been an outspoken proponent of the Palestinian effort and a sharp critic of the Israelis. The war in Gaza, there are some who point the finger at the West and say that either we haven't done enough or we should have done things differently, not only in America, but in Western Europe. What role has the West played in the last year?
Well, they've supported the genocide of the people of Palestine, hook, line, and sinker. They never once have raised their finger and said to their ally, the state of Israel, you can't do this. There is no room on this planet for an ethno-supremacist project that you are, that the state of Israel is, a Zionist project. You cannot start a state based upon the idea that you are superior to all the other people in the world, and particularly to your neighbors. Well, we're complaining about it because we hoped that we might develop, and we hope we might develop our capacity for empathy with others, and also for a capacity to be able to have conversations with other people with whom we might not agree, for instance.
Are there specific actions that the governments of the United States or Great Britain or France or others could or should have done in the last 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything any action that you have made, any of the governments of Europe, and certainly the government of the United States, that contravenes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Paris on December the 10th, 1948, is wrong, and you should stop doing it. And the government of the United States routinely contravenes the 30 articles of that declaration. This is the platform upon which my activism stands, is that platform. It's small, but it's also large because it covers all of us. It covers every human being on this planet, and it covers all our relationships. And if we all agreed that we should adhere to the idea that we all have or should have equal human rights, there would be no war on earth.
About a year ago, Hamas attacked Israel, and there were, ironically, with you and me talking, a concert. There were young people at this concert that were targeted when civilians were targeted, as opposed to military things. Is that acceptable? I guess the bigger question is, does Hamas, a year later, bear any responsibility for some of the consequences?
Well, yeah. Well, it depends what consequences you're talking about. Obviously, the attacking of civilians anywhere at any time contravenes international law. It's a war crime. So and there were undoubtedly war crimes committed on October the 7th last year. But by comparison with the crimes that have been committed since in that part of the globe, they were minimal. All right, I would say that. Some of the boys out there, having somehow got through the defenses and got into Israel, did attack civilians. And we know that. And we condemn them for it wholeheartedly. But that doesn't give us a reason to commit genocide.
You said something interesting when we were talking about you being a child of World War II, and that there was an opportunity then for a new beginning. And yes. I think in terms of now, the thing I worry about the most moving forward is the children right now. The children of this war in Gaza are being taught to be another generation to hate each other. And I'm wondering, how do we start a new beginning? How do we salvage those children on both sides?
it's not just the children in Gaza, it's all the children in Israel as well. And if things go really wrong, it could be all the children in the United States and all the children in Russia and all the children in China. So we the people have, you're quite right, we have to figure this out.
Short-term ceasefire and release of hostages. That's the catchphrase that any public official is saying. We'd love to achieve that. Long-term, what is the appropriate goal? Where would you like to see things for all eternity?
Palestine has to be a single unified democracy with equal rights for all its citizens from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. End of story. That is the only option and the only alternative to supremacy, an ethnic supremacist regime.
So while politicians in the region and in the West continue to talk, families' lives are forever changed in the horrific reality of war. Will a ceasefire come? And if so, when? Those are the only answers that matter to real people hoping to get some semblance of their regular lives back.